What's up, Jack Dallas followers? Been a little while once again. Um, I've recently acquired a new netbook, which I believe I can use more successfully for video streaming and recording. So hopefully this can be a more regular thing. Um, I was kind of thinking that until I go back to some more feature length topics, that I might just try to do some daily commenting on media articles that might catch my eye, or just kind of discuss the topics of the day. I'm going to touch on some Trump issues here during this video, and I think I just wanted to preface it by saying that when it comes to the issue of Trump or what's really going on with the whole media war that's going on with this administration, it's hard for me to comment or to know where to jump in, just because there's so much to say. There's so much that's already been said. And in a way, it feels like I'm starting a long book and just opening up to the middle of it or something. It's like, I don't really just want to be somebody in the whole field of people critiquing Trump. And right now, I feel like what's going on is you have obviously the left, which is just ridiculous in terms of its war on Trump. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that, they it's just a 24/7 attempt to try to get this guy out of office. But then you have a lot of people on the right, including not the alt-right, which I believe is a divisive, manipulative term, but in alternative media on the right side of the spectrum in general, who I sometimes feel will defend Trump ad nauseum no matter what goes on, to the point of them being somewhat equally boring as the leftist media. I don't really want to put myself in either category, but I will try to point out media bias where I see it. And I will also try to improve by essentially trying to discuss individual topics more so than what I would consider the petty back and forth of the day-to-day news cycle. In fact, I think one of the most damaging aspects of the Trump presidency, not so much his fault, but the coverage, I've noticed this, of the presidency has essentially led to American media, no matter what side of the spectrum they're on, the American media covers the Trump circus, the more circus aspects of his presidency, to a degree that it's legitimately somewhat difficult to just find news nowadays. This is especially true of cable news. If you just turn on the television news channels and cycle through and just watch every one of them for 5 or 10 minutes, it's more of a presidential soap opera than it is a news network anymore. And obviously, people that, well, for example, who I would assume watch a channel like mine, are more apt to be searching for legitimate media on the internet. But I just wanted to point that out. Nowadays, when you go to the news, not that we could really trust the mainstream media, but you could maybe just get a handle for what's going on. I mean, maybe I got 10 minutes before I'm heading to work. Let me just see what's happening in the world today. It's not even worth turning on the television anymore. I haven't owned a television since 2007. So when I watch television news, whether it's out of friends or out elsewhere, I'm a bit shocked at how much it's changed, but nonetheless, this doesn't really surprise me. So the first topic I wanted to get into are the Iran protests. Now, when it comes to these protests, you've got the sort of, Wikipedia American Western version of what's going on. And then if you examine some aspects of history, you've got what's most likely happening behind the scenes causing these protests to break out. Now, to make a long story short, myself and many others out there are pretty much, easily saying this kind of fits the CIA Mossad playbook, especially when examining some historical implications. You've got this sort of tumultuous history of Iran and how it relates to the West, going back to BP, British Petroleum, wanting to acquire oil fields, going back to American interests attempting to overthrow the Iranian regime and then having it fail. You've got, the 1979 attempted coup. Um, I would leave it to you guys to go out and research these things. If I were to get into all of that in detail, it would be its own video. But nonetheless, the Iranian government, although I'm not a big fan of them, and although I don't think that being, a citizen of Iran is exactly the most fun thing in the world, the Iranian government does have a legitimate point when they come out and say things like this, that the CIA is getting involved and trying to engineer these protests. Now, if you go back to other examples, not just in the Middle East, but going back to say the 70s and the 80s, instituting the U.S. instituting regime change in places like South America. You could think of Chile, or if you wanted to stick to a Middle Eastern example, you could think of a place like Libya. Whether the CIA or the military comes in and eventually approaches the issue from a hardline perspective, meaning using all-out military tactics. So in Libya, when you have NATO doing bombing runs to assist the quote-unquote rebels, it's pretty obvious that the West at that point has taken a stance. This is a lot different from what's most likely going on in Iran nowadays, which is essentially most likely, I mean, this is still opinion, but, it's pretty obvious. You saw this in Syria too. You've got the U.S. essentially paying in one way or another protesters to go out and flood the streets. What they're attempting to do is to make the movement look more legitimate and larger than it is. They're attempting to get this topic in the headlines. This helps them in Iran by getting more people to hopefully, join the protests, which would help their side, lend credibility to the movement, perhaps try to get things growing organically, which otherwise could not. It also keeps these topics in the headlines in America, which sort of paves the way for people getting used to the idea of war in Iran. I do think it's coming one of these days. I think we've been going after it for a while. I think we wanted to get other interests out of the way. I think the Israelis wanted to get other interests out of the way. We're moving down the list. We've got Iraq, we're working on Syria, we've got Libya, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's like a chess game. And, just like most chess games, you don't go after the king, on the first or second move on the board. So that's what's happening here. It takes some time. This is a long game. But nonetheless, I have to say that although I'm not a supporter of the Iranian government as a whole or their human rights abuses, I do believe they have a legitimate point when they say that Western intelligence is essentially attempting to usurp their leadership through nefarious means. I do agree. This has CIA fingerprints all over it, and that is most likely what's going on here. Jumping into a Trump-esque topic, like I said, it's pretty hard to know where to go here, just because there's so much, and it's almost like just pick your poison. If I had to try to sum it up, in like a Cliff Notes version, it's kind of like what I said earlier. I might not support Trump on a lot of individual issues. I really don't agree with his administration's foreign policy. I don't agree with the increased military spending. I don't agree with their support of Israel at all. I don't agree with the border wall, even though I agree with a lot of their stances on immigration, just because of the crisis that we're in. I just don't think that the wall in particular is a smart move. So my point is that there's a ton of individual topics, if we were to actually discuss policy or policies, in which I could actually come to the table and say, yeah, I disagree with this administration on XYZ. And I could have a pretty long list in no time. So the problem here is that, as everyone knows, 90% of the time, we're not talking about policy issues when we're discussing Trump. And 90% of the time, it's more of a circus than it is anything else. It's more of just a left-right media war. And part of what I part of what I fear is I don't want to be caught up um, in the two paradigms that I don't really enjoy. On the one hand, you have the mainstream media, and to a certain extent, Fox as well, because Fox is more of a Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio kind of network than they are a Trump network. Just because he's a Republican doesn't mean that they're just on the same team. Even though they're more favorable, they're definitely reluctant allies, if I had to say anything about Fox News and Trump. That being said, you have some media organizations that are just outrageously ridiculous in their bias against Trump and their reporting. In the print media, the Washington Post is perhaps the most egregious, more so than the New York Times. I have to say, I think the Washington Post is just. Listen. I'm gonna do a little bit of opinion here. When it comes to media, I try not to be too harsh all the time on where people get their sources, because I'm constantly examining my own biases and where my own thinking could be getting manipulated. But that being said, I truly believe that at this point, and I say this as respectfully as possible, if you are reading the Washington Post regularly and you think you're getting legitimate news or unbiased information, you're either lying to yourself or you're just not critically analyzing the material that you're reading. That paper is simply nothing more than an attempt every single day, day in and day out, to lend credence to arguments which they hope will get Trump essentially kicked out of office. The Washington Post is just insane. CNN is the same thing. I mean, you just have commentator after commentator. You see it with the press conferences, whether it's with Trump officials like Stephen Miller or Sarah Huckabee. And again, although I might talk to people like them and say, hey, I disagree with your individual topics, the handling of these people by the media is insane. The media does not interview these people. It does not ask questions. It is not attempting to report. It is simply attempting to craft stories. It is attempting to push a narrative. They're trying to make Trump look literally insane. That's what's going on with this Michael Wolff book, which, again, it's just another desperate attempt. Essentially, they're saying, look, the Russia story is not sticking. We can't make it stick. There's not enough evidence out there to even fabricate a lie. So we've got to pivot to the next strategy. And the current strategy is, let's make Trump look legitimately insane, because we got to get him out of office, at least in their opinion. And, the Russia story is a hoax. It's fake. I'm sorry. We're welcome to keep examining it. We're welcome to keep talking about it. That's fine. But every day, every week, every month that goes by, the Russia story becomes an even larger embarrassment, and it's going to end up being the topic that sinks the Democrats in 2020 if they don't give it up. That's my opinion. Going back to some of these stories, like I said before, guys, it's impossible to know where to jump in with Trump. So you just have to kind of grab the headline of the day, so to speak, if you're going to even talk about it. So the headline of the day today, is a lot of this stuff about Trump's, his comments on immigration, calling certain countries, shithole countries, saying we should have people from Norway instead of places like Haiti. You see the front page of the New York Times here. And then, of course, the opinion section, time to say it. Trump is a racist, which is the same exact thing that Don Lemon said. But Don Lemon's been saying that, since Trump was even a factor in the race, even before the election. Don Lemon's another one. I already talked about CNN, but he individually is pretty much as bad as the Washington Post. I mean, he's not a reporter. He's a propagandist. And if you watch this stuff and you enjoy it, it's because you've picked a team, you've made up your mind, you've closed your mind off, you're not looking at new evidence, and you're choosing to just believe people that don't rock your own intellectual boat. And that's just weak. We need to get away from people like this. But I bring it up just to essentially reference the fact that they're using this as some sort of evidence that Trump is a legitimate racist, like I said, I don't necessarily think that, the Trump administration is administering my version of immigration policy, so I'm not going to come out and defend it. But this kind of reporting is just sad. It's just such a weakly veiled attempt at, essentially trying to slander the entire administration. I think if you're seriously going to try to say that a quotation like this is like a legitimate reason to prove that Trump is a racist or that he's, in some way unfit to lead, that's just absolutely insane. The immigration debate is complicated in terms of policy, but very simple in terms of motivation, guys. The Republicans do not want a bunch of immigrants, especially third worlders, coming here because they don't vote for them and they use a lot of social services, which makes them dependent on the left. The left does want them coming here because those people are dependent on social services. The Democrats will give it to them no matter what, and they will vote for them. And if they get a large enough block of these people to come in, debate will not matter, topics will not matter, nothing will matter except the fact that the Democrats are giving stuff away for free, and those people will vote for them no matter what. I do believe the Democrats are trying to stack the deck, which is part of the reason that I kind of had to come into the political realm a little bit more than usual, just in terms of my talking points. I did not vote for Trump. I did not vote for Hillary. But, in terms of my own talking points, just because you have your ideal ways that you want the country to run, but at the same time, I saw what was happening as a crisis because I saw the potential of the Clinton administration essentially coming in and making topics no longer relevant in American elections, but just simply demographic numbers, just stacking the deck with people that will vote for them no matter what. And it's just not the way that I think the country should be run when all of us have to be here. And just because my own form of government or lack thereof in my personal case is not out there, does not mean that I can't act on a topic which I think is going to affect all of us right now. So nobody's really telling the truth about immigration, but in my opinion, the way that they're trying to cover this story is just another example of the ridiculous media bias. It's absolutely insane. And we'll move on from there. The fake news thing has been pretty big lately. I mean, you've got the Washington Post, again, with this link right here. They'll do anything they can to associate Trump with Hitler. It's just this whole hit piece. It's just absolutely insane. Companies like Facebook and, Twitter, they are doing their own part to propagandize, like the Washington Post, like CNN, by essentially engaging in a fake news, crusade, so to speak. Facebook already has been changing up how they're going to be doing this, essentially because of criticism that they received. If you read this little summary in TechCrunch here, I think it has all the points I wanted to make on this topic. No need to be repetitive. I think most of us that are at least open-minded enough to be, watching my videos in the first place understand where Facebook is coming from. Domestically, they're essentially left-wing. Globally, they are globalist. They want, mass immigration. They definitely are on the more, George Soros type of bandwagon. They clearly supported Hillary in the election. They clearly are against Trump. And with organizations like Facebook and Twitter, when they come out with a quote unquote fake news crusade, what they're really saying is we got to get rid of conservative news and we need to get rid of all the news which is uncovering bad facts about the Democrats. Going back to the leaks, the DNC leaks, which helped to essentially finish off Hillary in the campaign, you have to remember that nothing that was in the leaks was really wrong or not factually verified. It is a fact that the DNC purposely sunk the Bernie Sanders campaign because they saw that in a legitimate open election, he would most likely receive the nomination over Hillary, and they wanted her to run. Perhaps this move, I'm not really sure, we can argue over it, but this move perhaps is why Trump is in office in the first place, because Hillary didn't win. She lost. So again, we can argue over the merit of whether Bernie had a better shot. Perhaps he would have lost by an even larger margin than Clinton. But nonetheless, Clinton lost. So by sabotaging Bernie, the Democrats definitely shot themselves in the foot, because at least he would have had a chance. And in hindsight, she didn't. It is also a fact that multiple media organizations, I mean, the list is too long to name, but multiple media organizations colluded with the DNC to essentially ask, I mean, the amount of things they did were insane. They colluded with them about whether individual articles were fit with publication. They changed quotations at the Clinton campaign's request. They covered certain information about Trump at the Clinton campaign's request. They edited articles essentially on a day-by-day, case-by-case basis to make points that the DNC wanted in mainstream media circulate more openly. That is a fact. My point in bringing this up is that when you have organizations like Facebook and Twitter trying to come out and censor fake news, and most people with a brain are saying, look, you're not censoring fake news, you're getting rid of, inconvenient information for the Democrats, and you're at the same time subduing information which is making either, the American right or just sort of the anti-Hillary globalist overall agenda, you guys know what I mean, look bad. When people see something which is so obvious taking place, it's pretty much impossible to hide. Again, I think that anybody who looks at, say, the Facebook fake news campaign and says, oh yeah, they're really, making our media more accurate, is the same kind of person that reads the Washington Post and says, this is real journalism. It's just clearly fake. Moving on to a happier topic here. This is pretty interesting. So it looks like Vermont is definitely going to legalize marijuana here. It's interesting for a couple of reasons for anybody who follows the topic. It's interesting because it's a legislative move. This in a lot of other states like California, Colorado, you had a vote. The marijuana legalization for recreational use was essentially a ballot initiative. It was put to a vote, and the people had their chance to vote, and it was passed. The main difference in Vermont is that it's 100% a legislative move. So essentially the government internally just legalizing marijuana and saying, we're making this decision on our own, no vote necessary, which for this topic is cool. I think it's dangerous that they have that kind of power in the first place. But obviously, pretty much, again, any thinking person is going to say this is a good move. I don't think it's a good move for how corporate they're trying to make it. The fact that there's so much favoritism in the licensing, so much favoritism in the financial aspect of what's going on, and the fact that politicians are crafting the laws to make it more favorable for large corporations to come in, grab the licenses, grab the money, and keep lower scale players out. I think that's just the typical crap that you see. That's cronyism. That is not capitalism. That's cronyism. And that's government interfering once again. But nonetheless, it's better to have marijuana be legal than illegal. We can't have people sitting in jail for anything having to do with this plant. It is simply immoral, whether using it, selling it, growing it, or anything else. Which brings me to my other point about this. Vermont is allowing some home cultivation, pretty much small scale, but they are allowing some. This is a point that I wanted to bring up, guys. When it comes to marijuana legalization, state by state, I think it's a travesty when states legalize and don't allow home cultivation. They're essentially saying, we realize that this plant is not harmful. It's safe enough to have it sold in stores to anyone who is of age, but you can't make it yourself. You can't grow it yourself. We need our taxes. We need to help our corporations. So, all these corporations end up with the licenses, and suddenly, it turns out that if you do some research, your local, hippy dippy dispensary is actually owned by some basically large scale financial interest or investor that you might not want to support otherwise. This is why they make laws like this. They'll claim it's to prevent the black market from coming in. That's not true at all. The black market was going to exist one way or another. If somebody's going to grow in their home, they're going to do it, obviously, before or after the law. So essentially, this is nothing more than an attempt to monopolize the industry for corporations so that they will be favorable to politicians. It's just more of the same crap. It's more cronyism. New Jersey is an example of this. You have Phil Murphy. I don't like it when politicians use marijuana for personal gain. And I have to say, even though it looks like New Jersey will probably legalize over the summer, I don't particularly care for the fact that they are passing it, not allowing home cultivation, as I was talking about. And the fact that, although a lot of you might not have been following the gubernatorial race in New Jersey, Phil Murphy, he had a fairly easy run simply because a lot of people didn't like Chris Christie by the end, and because he's a Democrat in New Jersey. He just has an easier time. But Phil Murphy essentially leveraged marijuana as what a lot of people would call his number one topic. It was certainly top three for the campaign. And I feel that he essentially used the marijuana topic as a cop-out. It was like his way of guaranteeing he was going to win. And I just don't like to see politicians leveraging a topic which I think has so much importance, whether it's medically or really just societally, for how much damage the prohibition of marijuana does, how much it costs us in tax money, the people sitting in jail, just the moral implications of the fact that you can't use a plant which organically grows in the ground. We've all heard these arguments, but it's insane. I don't like seeing politicians leverage it for gain. It's like the carrot being, held on the stick in front of the donkey so that it keeps walking. It just, I don't like being manipulated like that. And I don't like it when they dangle legalization in front of us, but then when it comes in, it's taxed through the roof. You can't grow it at home. It's monopolized, and suddenly it's legal, but it's not in an environment that we want. So that's something to consider. That's why a lot of people voted against the bill that was recently passed in California. Even though it passed, a lot of the people that voted against it were not against it because they were anti-marijuana. A lot of those people were in the marijuana industry, but they just felt that the bill was way too favorable to corporate interests. And as you're seeing now, that's pretty much true. Marijuana is technically legal in California right now, but there's less than 150 licensed dispensaries. The government did not get its act together at all. And the tax rate looks like it's going to be to the point that marijuana will be even more expensive legally than it was on the black market as much as 5 to 10 years ago. So that is just insane. I mean, that just goes to show from a financial perspective how incompetent government can be when it colludes with corporations. And that is cronyism, not capitalism. So that's going to pretty much do it for today, guys. Definitely appreciate you hanging out and listening. Going to try to make this a more regular thing. It's really nice not to have an annoying, loud fan blowing on my laptop as I'm recording videos because my computer is ancient. So we'll see how this goes, and definitely get in touch with me on Twitter at RealJackDallas. I'm on YouTube at Jack Dallas. Email therealjackdallas@gmail.com. Ask me anything and anything. We'll talk soon, guys.